After being exiled for their religion, pioneers of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints found themselves stranded on the banks of the Missouri River. Tragically, these pioneers didn't have enough money to ferry themselves across the river. To make things worse, mobs were on their way to brutalize the pioneers for their faith. Unwilling to accept such a bleak fate, some of the men in the group had an idea. They would catch a few fish and pray that the ferrymen would accept their fish as payment. They casted their line and caught a heaping catfish. It was 14 pounds soaking wet, because all fish are soaking wet. When they opened the fish, they were in disbelief. Inside, they found 3 silver dollars, just enough to ferry everyone in the group across the river. They offered their thanks to God for such a miracle. Their story is both inspiring and informative. Rather than pray and wait on the Lord to fix their problems, these saints got to work and casted their lines into the river. Once their line was in the water, they were able to get the miraculous fish. When we put our best effort forward, much like the loaves and the fish, Jesus can magnify our efforts. On the other hand, if we are complacent and just sit idly by, the Lord cannot magnify our efforts when there are none. When you multiply 0 by anything, it's still 0. Today, I invite you to cast your line and be amazed at what the Lord can provide you. For more faith-promoting stories, follow me, but ultimately follow him. 1916, the construction of the Laie Temple in Hawaii hit a critical roadblock. Due to a massive demand for lumber in World War I, ships carrying lumber to Hawaii ended up being diverted. This caused a scarcity of critical materials that threatened the construction of the temple. When lumber that was essential for scaffolding in concrete forms finally ran out, Ralph Woolley, the temple contractor, prayed earnestly for a miracle. Incredibly, just a few days after Brother Woolley's supplication, a freight ship with an enormous cargo of lumber ran aground on a nearby coral reef that had crashed because of a storm. The ship's captain offered the entirety of the load to the saints if they would only help him to free his ship. Saints from all over Hawaii came to aid the captain. Once the ship was freed, the promised transaction was completed and the lumber for the temple was secured. Construction for the temple was not only resumed, but it was carried out successfully to the temple's completion. This story demonstrates one of the most potent formulas for a miracle. The making of a miracle is most likely when 3 things are present. First, a good cause, in this case, the construction of a temple of God. 2 is a good prayer offered in faith and a willingness to accept the will of the Lord regardless of the outcome. The third, most significantly and often overlooked, is a good work, or the willingness to be the Lord's hands and, if necessary, to carry out the miracle by force of our own labor and the sweat of our brow. When good intentions, faith, and work intersect, there we find the position of the power of divinity. I implore you to give this formula your own try in your own faith journey. For more faith-promoting stories, follow me, but ultimately follow him. Elder Wolfgram was serving as a mission president in Tonga when one of the most remarkable miracles was wrought by his hand. During Elder Wolfgram's service, his 3-year-old daughter was tragically hit by a loaded taxi. She did not survive the incident. When the passengers of the taxi delivered Elder Wolfgram his lifeless daughter, her head and face were horribly disfigured by the accident. The passengers of the taxi moved the girl's body to a chapel at the request of her father. The spectacle had now attracted a group of curious villagers. As Elder Wolfgram went to give his daughter a blessing, he was constrained by the spirit. He was told that the unbelief of the crowd was inhibiting his ability to perform a miracle. Elder Wolfgram turned to the crowd and told them that their unbelief was rendering a blessing impossible. He invited them to leave, and they did so without offense. Elder Wolfgram and his wife delivered their daughter home. Her body was already beginning to show signs of decay. Finally, the spirit informed Elder Wolfgram that the time had come to administer a blessing. Elder Wolfgram implored the Lord to open the doors of paradise that her soul might be reunited with her body again. The Lord spoke to Elder Wolfgram's heart, telling him that she would be well in the morning. After a long and anxious night, the morning came. With the sun, Elder Wolfgram's daughter arose. Her head and face were devoid of injury. Why don't we speak freely of miracles of this magnitude? Why are we instructed to keep miracles sacred? The Spirit spoke a profound truth to Elder Wolfgram in that village crowd. Miracles are not for spectacle, but for sanctification. Of those that watch this video, some will be amazed, some will be angry, and some will be grieved, but none will be convinced. If you are searching for life-defining truth, you must take it up with its arbiter. Pray to God, and you will know truth. For more faith-promoting stories, follow me, but ultimately follow him. During the infamous Hans Mill massacre in 1838, 10-year-old Alma Smith was struck with a musket ball that completely annihilated his hip socket. Alma's mother, Amanda Barnes Smith, was at a complete loss for how to help her wounded son. She prayed to the Lord for help. An answer came to her. She was to clean the wound with lye solution and apply elm poultices. She told Alma, the Lord can make something there in place of your hip. She instructed him to lie face down, and she went to work. Alma lay motionless for 5 weeks, demonstrating extraordinary willpower and patience. At the conclusion of his immobilization, all were shocked to discover that flexible gristle had grown in place of the socket. Miraculously, Alma regained complete mobility. The healing was so anomalous that doctors across the nation came to observe the Mormon miracle. When doctors pressed Amanda for who had performed such a remarkable surgery, she responded, Jesus Christ. The notion of the impossible has been imposed on the possible throughout human history. The Wright brothers were told that an aircraft heavier than air could not fly by grace of intuitive deduction. And then they flew. Doctors once proclaimed that a sub-4-minute mile was impossible by the mechanical constraints of the human body. Since 1954, that miracle has been broken dozens of times. In your life, don't be so arrogant to presume the impossibility of your own potential. For with God, nothing shall be impossible. For more faith-promoting stories, follow me, but ultimately follow him. By the time of the 1870s, Danish immigrant Peter Nielsen was on the verge of fulfilling a dream. Through years of intense toil and sacrifice, Peter had accumulated $600 to add additional rooms to his humble adobe in Washington, Utah. Contemporaneously, the St. George Tabernacle needed 2,244 window panes, costing a sum of $800. The community had scraped together $200, but the deficit seemed unattainable. Defeated, Brother David H. Cannon resolved to seek the funds in California. He committed a party of freight wagons to the venture. On the evening of the party's departure, Peter was restless. He was disturbed by an unwavering prompting. At dawn, Peter arose with, quote, a candle and only the light of the gospel to guide him. He retrieved his savings and walked 7 miles to St. George. At first light, David responded to a knocking on his door. He was greeted by Peter with a red bandana sagging under the weight of exactly $600. Peter told him, you will know what to do with this money. Peter did not return to a large home, but he did return to a full home, stuffed wall to wall with devotion, a loving family, and barely standing room to accommodate the colossal character of a disciple of Jesus Christ. Peter's gold would have eventually gone the way of moth and rust. Instead, he made a deposit in a celestial bank, one that would forever pay celestial dividends in Peter's name. My thought today is only an echo of Christ's most penetrating question. Where does your treasure lie? If the answer to that question has a mortal expiration date, I implore you to reconsider. For more faith-promoting stories, follow me, but ultimately follow him. When Thomas S. Monson was 12 years old, he was an avid player and consumer of baseball. Tucked behind a Salt Lake alleyway, Tommy and his friends devised a makeshift playing field that was completely functional as long as you hit the ball directly down center field. This was because directly outside their first base lived a solitary woman by the name of Mrs. Sheenis, and tragically she did not share in their affinity of baseball. Whenever Tommy or his friends hit a baseball into her lawn, her dog that was waiting on the front porch would instinctively retrieve the ball and bring it back to Mrs. Sheenis. This war spanned 2 years, and in that time, the boys and the old woman both shared a growing resentment for the other. Eventually, the boys' finite supply of baseballs was exhausted, and their beloved pastime had to be discontinued. One evening, while Tommy was watering his family's front lawn with a hose, he noticed that Mrs. Sheenis' lawn was starting to brown. Something suddenly came over Tommy, and without really understanding why, he took the additional time to water Mrs. Sheenis' lawn. This kindness initiated a pattern. Throughout the summer, he watered her lawn, and when the fall came, he would rake and dispose of her leaves. All the while, Tommy did not see, let alone speak to Mrs. Sheenis. She was a recluse, and without the incentive of an orphaned baseball, she remained inside her home. One evening, Mrs. Sheenis spontaneously opened her front door and beckoned Tommy to come in, to which he obliged. When he entered, he was met with an astonishing scene: a fresh plate of cookies, milk, and a large collection of confiscated baseballs. For the first time ever, Mrs. Sheenis smiled at Tommy and said, "Tommy, I want you to have these baseballs, and I want to thank you for being kind to me." President Monson concluded with the reflection that he left a better boy than when he entered. As members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we may sometimes be criticized, or worse, for what we believe. We may ask to be treated better, or that we might be regarded with greater equality. But when our bids for kindness are captured, like baseballs on a browning lawn, let us remember this truth: if you'd like to convince the world of your Christianity, show them Christ through you. Turn the other cheek, and once they've wearied themselves at your expense, relieve them as much as you are able. Our words may stir others, but it is our kindness, love, and tolerance that will reveal our true allegiance to Jesus Christ. That is the way of Jesus Christ. For more faith-promoting stories, follow me, but ultimately follow him. In 1989, an angry militia incited a rebellion on the Philippine government at Camp Aguinaldo. Situated right next to the battle was the Manila Temple for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. As war ensued, the rebel soldiers and tanks broke through the temple gates and occupied its ground. As artillery rained down on the temple, windows to the temple annex were shattered, but the temple itself remained untouched. The battle escalated. Government troops planned an all-out attack on the rebels. If their attack was successfully carried out, the temple would most likely be annihilated. In the very same moment, the first presidency and quorum of the 12 apostles importuned the Lord for the preservation of the temple. When the prayer had concluded, they shortly thereafter received word that the attack had been inexplicably canceled. The rebels had vanished by morning. When the site was audited for damage, the saints were astounded to find shells strewn about the temple grounds, some even passing through spires, but their edifice had been saved. The only remaining evidence of the attack on the temple was that of a single bullet hole high up on a spire. The temple opened the next day for use. When the Savior was resurrected following his crucifixion, he chose to retain the scars on his hands, feet, and side. Despite the ineffably exquisite horrors of his atonement, he kept his scars. Beautifully, a scar can simultaneously represent both pain and healing, a fitting emblem for the Christ. I like to think that one bullet was permitted to strike the temple, that its scars might teach us something about the nature of Jesus Christ. For more faith-promoting stories, follow me, but ultimately follow him. In 1856, Ephraim Hanks was preparing for bed when he heard his name being called. This voice repeated the same phrase 3 times to Ephraim. "The handcart people are in trouble, and you are wanted. Will you go and help them?" Each time Ephraim replied, "If you call me, then I will go." When Ephraim arrived in Salt Lake City 2 days later, he found President Young calling for volunteers to rescue the stranded Willie and Martin handcart companies. While other volunteers told President Young that they would need several days to prepare for the trip, Ephraim told him, "I am ready right now." The very next day, Ephraim set off in a Wyoming blizzard to go rescue the saints. After a perilous journey, fueled by miraculously provided buffalo in response to a prayer, Ephraim finally found the saints in desolate condition. Ephraim went to work. He performed several healing miracles, and he later remarked the following: "In scores of instances, when administering to the sick and rebuking diseases in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, the sufferers would rally at once. They were healed almost instantly." Ephraim brought food, clothing, and in extraordinary quantity, hope to the saints. To my knowledge, actor Will Smith has never given any general conference addresses. Regardless, one of his statements on courage has always resonated with me. "The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid. It is he who conquers fear." Courage is not allotted in finite installments to a few predestined heroes. Courage is claimed. Like any quality of Christ, bravery is gained in increments. Small acts of courage culminate in character-defining legacies. Do something brave today. For more faith-promoting stories, follow me, but ultimately follow him. Today's story deals with themes of children in peril, so just want to offer that as a content warning. In 1892, an epidemic of diphtheria had reached its peak. When left untreated, this disease possessed a mortality rate of 50 to 90% in children. Elder James E. Talmage, then only a professor, discovered that one of the neighboring families had become stricken by the disease. Because of the virulent nature of the illness, no one dared enter the home for fear that their own well-being would be compromised. This family did not share in Elder Talmage's faith. In fact, they were complete strangers to him. Compelled by his own commitment to kindness, Elder Talmage could not stand idly by. Despite the danger, he entered the home. When he arrived, he was met with a harrowing scene. One of the toddlers was already deceased, and the two remaining children lie in critical condition. He went to work. He cleaned the house, prepared the young body for burial, and provided for the other sick children, and stayed the entire day through. When he arrived the next morning, he was grieved to discover that another child had passed. The only remaining child was suffering terribly. He later wrote, "She clung to my neck, oftentimes coughing germs on my face and clothing, yet I could not put her from me. During the half hour immediately preceding her passing, I walked the floor holding the little creature in my arms. She passed in agony." Elder Talmage then returned home, bathed in zinc, quarantined, and suffered through his own episode of the illness. What is the utility of kindness? Elder Talmage, despite his heroic efforts, was unable to preserve the lives of any of the children. He put himself in mortal peril for a day of kindness. Jesus said that whosoever shall save his own life shall lose it, but whosoever shall lose his life for Christ's sake shall find it. Perhaps Jesus' statement was not only a commentary on martyrdom, but a template for life. When we live for ourselves, we are lifeless. But when we live for others, then are we truly alive. Elder Talmage seemed to know something about this truth. For more faith-promoting stories, follow me, but ultimately follow him. Henry Clegg Jr. joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Preston, England, and embarked on a journey to Utah with his wife and two young sons. Tragically, Henry's wife, Hannah, did not survive the journey. She contracted cholera and passed away. Henry had to bury her in an unmarked grave. That very same evening, with a sorrow that only few have experienced, Henry also lost his son. Henry retraced his steps for 5 miles back to his wife's grave. He placed his son in her arms and reburied them together. Under the intense agony of grief, Henry might have empathized with Job when he too contracted cholera. He still had 1,000 miles to walk. Henry's journal entries stopped for weeks. When he finally resumed writing, he wrote only 2 words: "Still moving." Eventually, Henry did arrive in Zion. He established a happy and prosperous life that has inspired generations of his descendants. There are stretches of time that seem endless, and there are periods of suffering that feel eternal, but they aren't. Here you are, walking the straight and narrow path, some wounded, some solitude, but never truly alone. When the road ahead seems expansive and cold, I remind you that there is a destination, and alongside you, a travel companion. As Jesus continues to guide you to your heavenly home, I hope you'll find resonance in Henry's words. Still moving. For more faith-promoting stories, follow me, but ultimately follow him.